There comes a moment in many painful relationships when everything suddenly begins to make sense. The confusion that once clouded your judgment starts to clear, and the small inconsistencies you dismissed as misunderstandings begin to connect like pieces of a puzzle. What once looked like isolated incidents now reveal a consistent pattern. The charm that captivated you, the promises that gave you hope, the affectionate words that made you feel chosen, all of it starts to feel different when viewed through the lens of truth. One of the most terrifying realities about a narcissistic individual is not that they become someone else over time. It is that they eventually stop pretending to be someone they never were. The mask does not create the monster. The mask simply hides it until there is no longer a reason to keep wearing it. In the beginning, everything feels almost too good to be true. They seem attentive, deeply interested in your life, and eager to understand your dreams, fears, and desires. They study you with remarkable precision, noticing the smallest details that make you feel seen and appreciated. They know exactly what to say to make you believe you have finally found someone who truly understands you. They mirror your values, share your passions, and present themselves as the answer to prayers you may have whispered for years. Their confidence appears attractive, their generosity seems genuine, and their affection feels overwhelming in the best possible way. Looking back, you realize they were not simply learning about you to build intimacy. They were collecting information to build an identity that matched your deepest emotional needs. This carefully constructed image requires constant effort. Every smile, every compliment, every thoughtful gesture becomes part of a performance designed to earn your trust. Maintaining that performance demands incredible energy because it is built on illusion rather than authenticity. Eventually, every performance reaches a point where the actor grows tired. The more secure they feel in your attachment, the less motivated they become to continue pretending. Once they believe you are emotionally invested, financially dependent, spiritually committed, or socially connected to them, they begin revealing parts of themselves they previously kept hidden. The changes rarely happen overnight. They appear in subtle ways that are easy to dismiss. The compliments become less frequent. The patience begins to disappear. The warmth grows cold without explanation. Small criticisms start replacing encouragement. What once felt like loving honesty slowly transforms into relentless judgment. They begin speaking to you in ways they never would have dared during the early days of the relationship. At first, you assume they are stressed, overwhelmed, or simply having a difficult season. You tell yourself everyone has bad days. You extend grace because that is what caring people do. Unfortunately, your compassion becomes the very thing that allows the truth to remain hidden a little longer. As time passes, their reactions become increasingly disproportionate. Minor disagreements turn into major conflicts. Honest questions are treated as personal attacks. Healthy boundaries are labeled as disrespect. Your opinions suddenly become evidence that you are selfish or ungrateful. You find yourself apologizing for things you never intended to do, not because you believe you were wrong, but because keeping the peace feels easier than enduring another emotional storm. Without realizing it, you begin adjusting your personality to avoid triggering their anger. You laugh less freely, speak more cautiously, and think twice before expressing your thoughts. You are no longer living authentically, you are surviving. The frightening part is that while your world grows smaller, theirs grows more comfortable. They no longer worry about maintaining the perfect image because they believe they have already secured your loyalty. The kindness that once seemed effortless becomes rare. The empathy that once appeared so natural seems to vanish. You begin searching desperately for the person you met in the beginning, convinced they must still exist somewhere beneath the stress or frustration. You tell yourself that if you love them harder, become more patient, communicate more clearly, or sacrifice a little more of yourself, perhaps the version you first encountered will return. But what you are chasing was never their authentic self. It was a carefully designed introduction meant to gain access to your trust. One of the greatest tragedies is how often people blame themselves during this stage. They assume they have somehow caused the change. They replay conversations in their minds, wondering if they said the wrong thing or failed to meet an expectation. They work tirelessly to repair a relationship that only one person is trying to preserve. The narcissist often encourages this self-blame by suggesting that their behavior is merely a reaction to your shortcomings. Instead of accepting responsibility, they redirect the focus onto your supposed flaws, making you believe that if you simply became better, everything would return to normal. Over time, the contrast between the beginning and the present becomes impossible to ignore. The person who once praised your strengths now criticizes those same qualities. The one who celebrated your independence now calls it rebellion. The one who promised unconditional support now withholds affection whenever you fail to meet their demands. The shift feels shocking because it exposes the difference between genuine character and calculated performance. Character remains consistent even under pressure. Performance changes the moment it no longer serves its purpose. This revelation can feel devastating because it forces you to mourn not only the relationship, but also the future you imagined. You grieve the dreams you built together, the promises you believed, and the version of the person you thought you knew. It is painful to accept that someone who appeared so loving could become so emotionally distant and controlling. Yet the truth is often simpler than it first appears. They did not suddenly transform into someone cruel. The carefully maintained image simply gave way to the reality that had always existed beneath it. Recognizing this truth is not about becoming cynical or believing that everyone hides malicious intentions. It is about learning the difference between words that create hope and actions that consistently reveal character. Genuine love grows stronger as familiarity increases because authenticity has nothing to hide. Manipulation, however, becomes weaker over time because deception is exhausting to maintain. When the mask finally falls, it is not revealing a new identity. It is exposing the one that was present all along, waiting for the moment when pretending was no longer necessary. There is something deeply unsettling about realizing that the person who claims to care about you is not merely indifferent to your pain, but seems to draw satisfaction from it. Most people, even when angry or disappointed, eventually soften when they see someone they love hurting. Compassion is one of the most natural human responses. We instinctively comfort those who are crying, apologize when we realize we have caused harm, and seek reconciliation after conflict. A narcissistic individual who has abandoned all pretense often operates by an entirely different set of rules. Instead of feeling troubled by your emotional suffering, they begin treating it as confirmation of their power. Your tears become evidence that they still control your emotions. Your confusion reassures them that they remain in command of the relationship. Your desperation convinces them that you are still trapped within the invisible walls they have carefully built around you. In the early stages of the relationship, they may appear deeply compassionate. They know exactly how to comfort you, what words to say, and how to present themselves as someone who would never intentionally hurt another person. They create the impression that they are your safest place, someone who understands your struggles better than anyone else. Ironically, the very vulnerabilities you trusted them with often become the tools they later use against you. The fears you confessed during quiet conversations, the painful memories you shared with tears in your eyes, and the insecurities you revealed because you believed you were finally accepted are quietly stored away. They are not forgotten. They are cataloged, waiting for the moment when those weaknesses can be transformed into weapons. When conflict begins, the change is subtle but significant. Instead of resolving disagreements with honesty and respect, they start pressing emotional buttons they already know exist. They mention the one mistake you regret the most. They compare you to people who once hurt you. They question your intelligence, your worth, your appearance, or your ability to succeed in life. None of these attacks happen by accident. They are carefully chosen because they know exactly where your deepest emotional wounds are hidden. Every cruel remark is designed to provoke a reaction that gives them a sense of superiority. One of the most disturbing aspects of this behavior is the calmness with which it is often delivered. While you struggle to hold back tears, they may remain strangely composed. They watch your emotional reaction without offering comfort or concern. In some cases, they even appear amused by your distress. A slight smirk, a dismissive laugh, or a sarcastic comment can communicate something far more frightening than anger ever could. It reveals that your suffering is no longer viewed as unfortunate. It has become entertaining. You may find yourself wondering how someone who once seemed so affectionate could become so emotionally detached. The answer is not that they suddenly stopped caring. It is that the caring you believed was unconditional was often tied to control. As long as you admired them, agreed with them, or fulfilled the role they expected you to play, kindness was easy to provide. The moment you challenged their authority, questioned their behavior, or attempted to establish healthy boundaries, their priorities changed. Your emotional well-being became secondary to their desire to maintain dominance. This is why they often create situations that leave you feeling unstable. They provoke arguments over insignificant issues, knowing that your frustration will eventually boil over. Once you react emotionally, they shift the focus away from their behavior and point to your response as proof that you are the problem. They accuse you of being overly sensitive, irrational, dramatic, or impossible to please. They intentionally ignite the fire and then criticize you for trying to escape the flames. This cycle keeps you trapped in constant self-doubt because you spend more time defending your reactions than examining what caused them. Another frightening sign is their willingness to repeat behaviors they know cause pain. Most healthy people, after realizing they have deeply hurt someone they love, make sincere efforts to avoid repeating the same mistake. A narcissistic individual moving further into emotional cruelty often does the opposite. Once they discover what hurts you most, they revisit it repeatedly. If abandonment frightens you, they threaten to leave every time there is disagreement. If rejection wounds you deeply, they withdraw affection whenever you express your needs. If public embarrassment is painful for you, they criticize or mock you in front of others. The repetition is intentional because predictable suffering becomes another method of maintaining control. You may notice that they become increasingly fascinated by your emotional breaking points. They observe how much criticism you can tolerate before crying, how much silence you can endure before apologizing, or how much rejection you will accept before begging for reassurance. It begins to feel less like a relationship and more like an experiment in emotional endurance. Every limit you thought existed is tested, pushed, and crossed again. They become skilled at recognizing the exact moment when you're about to collapse emotionally, and instead of stopping, they often intensify the pressure. Perhaps one of the most painful experiences is realizing that your tears no longer move them. There may have been a time when crying brought comfort, concern, or a sincere attempt to understand your feelings. Now your tears are met with irritation, ridicule, or complete indifference. They may accuse you of manipulating them, seeking attention, or trying to make them feel guilty. In doing so, they completely reverse reality. The victim becomes the accused, while the one causing the pain claims innocence. This reversal leaves you questioning not only the relationship but your own perception of what is happening. Over time, you begin changing your behavior to avoid giving them opportunities to hurt you. You stop sharing your fears because they become ammunition. You stop expressing disappointment because it leads to punishment. You stop celebrating your successes because they respond with jealousy or criticism. Little by little, your authentic self disappears beneath layers of emotional protection. You are no longer communicating openly. You are carefully calculating every word, every expression, and every decision in hopes of avoiding another painful encounter. The most heartbreaking reality is that many victims continue searching for signs of empathy long after those signs have disappeared. They remember the kindness from the beginning and convince themselves that it must still exist somewhere beneath the anger. They wait for an apology that never comes, hoping each new day will bring back the compassionate person they once believed they knew. Meanwhile, the narcissist grows increasingly comfortable using emotional pain as a tool of influence because each successful manipulation reinforces their belief that cruelty produces results. Recognizing this pattern is one of the most difficult but also one of the most important moments in the journey toward emotional freedom. It allows you to stop measuring the relationship by isolated moments of temporary kindness and instead evaluate it by the consistent pattern of behavior. When someone repeatedly chooses actions that inflict emotional pain, ignores the damage they cause, and appears strengthened rather than troubled by your suffering, the issue is no longer occasional conflict. It reveals a relationship where compassion has been replaced by control, empathy has given way to exploitation, and another person's pain has become a source of personal satisfaction. One of the most heartbreaking discoveries in a relationship with a narcissistic person is realizing that what you believed were acts of genuine love were often carefully calculated investments. In healthy relationships, kindness is freely given because love naturally desires the well-being of another person. A thoughtful gift, a helping hand during difficult times, words of encouragement, or a meaningful sacrifice are expressions of care that ask for nothing in return. They are offered because compassion does not keep score. A narcissistic individual, however, often approaches generosity with an entirely different mindset. What appears to be selfless kindness is frequently a transaction hidden beneath the appearance of affection. Every favor has an invisible price tag, every sacrifice creates an unspoken debt, and every generous gesture is quietly recorded in a mental ledger that they fully expect you to repay. At first, this generosity can feel overwhelming. They seem eager to help in every situation. They offer assistance before you even ask for it. They insist on paying for meals, solving your problems, introducing you to influential people, or making sacrifices that leave you feeling deeply grateful. You begin to believe you have found someone remarkably giving and supportive. Friends and family may even admire how devoted they appear. Their kindness becomes part of the image they carefully construct, convincing everyone around them that they are thoughtful, generous, and deeply committed to the relationship. It creates an emotional bond built on gratitude, making it difficult for you to imagine questioning their motives. The true nature of these acts often remains hidden until the relationship encounters conflict. During disagreements, moments that once seemed like beautiful expressions of love suddenly reappear in an entirely different form. Instead of discussing the issue at hand, they begin listing everything they have ever done for you. A birthday gift becomes evidence that you owe them loyalty. Financial support becomes proof that you have no right to disagree with them. Time they spent helping you becomes ammunition in an argument. Every act of kindness that once made you feel loved is transformed into a weapon designed to make you feel guilty. This shift can be incredibly confusing because it forces you to reinterpret your memories. You begin wondering whether any of those generous moments were sincere. The surprise vacation, the comforting words during a difficult season, the sacrifices they claim to make for your happiness, all of them are suddenly presented as debts you are expected to repay through obedience, silence, or unquestioning admiration. Instead of generosity creating freedom within the relationship, it creates obligation. Love becomes a contract you never realized you had signed. One of the most damaging tactics they use is reminding you of their sacrifices whenever you attempt to establish healthy boundaries. The moment you say no, express discomfort, or ask for respect, they immediately redirect the conversation. Rather than addressing your concerns, they begin recounting every favor they have ever done for you. They remind you how much money they spent, how much time they invested, or how many opportunities they supposedly gave up for your benefit. The discussion is no longer about solving a problem. It becomes an attempt to make you feel so guilty that you abandon your own needs entirely. The imbalance becomes even more painful because your own sacrifices are rarely acknowledged. You may have supported them through personal crises, encouraged their dreams, overlooked countless mistakes, and sacrificed your own emotional well-being to keep the relationship alive. Yet those contributions are quickly forgotten or minimized. When you remind them of your efforts, they dismiss them as insignificant or claim you should have done even more. Their generosity is celebrated as extraordinary, while yours is treated as expected. This double standard keeps you trapped in a cycle where you constantly feel indebted despite giving far more than you receive. Over time, you begin noticing that many of their generous acts arrive without being requested. They insist on helping even when you politely decline. They purchase expensive gifts you never asked for. They volunteer to solve problems you were already handling. At first, this may seem like remarkable thoughtfulness, but later you realize these unsolicited acts create additional leverage. They intentionally place themselves in the position of the generous rescuer because every rescue increases your perceived obligation toward them. They are not simply meeting your needs. They are strengthening the emotional chains that make leaving the relationship more difficult. Another painful realization comes when they begin withholding kindness altogether. The generosity that once flowed so freely suddenly disappears whenever you fail to meet their expectations. Affection becomes conditional. Support becomes conditional. Encouragement becomes conditional. Their willingness to help now depends entirely on your willingness to submit. This inconsistency creates emotional confusion because you spend enormous amounts of energy trying to earn back the kindness that once seemed unconditional. You begin believing that if you become more patient, more understanding, or more accommodating, the loving person from the beginning will return. What you often fail to see is that kindness controlled by conditions is not genuine love. It is a reward system designed to shape your behavior. The manipulation becomes even more sophisticated when they perform generous acts publicly while behaving very differently in private. In front of family members, friends, or coworkers, they appear exceptionally caring and selfless. They go out of their way to display generosity where others can witness it. These public displays reinforce their reputation as a wonderful person while making it more difficult for anyone to believe your private experiences. If you ever describe their controlling behavior, others struggle to reconcile your story with the generous image they have personally observed. Their kindness becomes more than a personal weapon. It becomes a shield protecting them from accountability. Perhaps one of the most exhausting consequences is the guilt that settles into your heart. You begin feeling selfish for asking for basic respect because they constantly remind you of everything they have supposedly done for you. Even when their behavior becomes emotionally abusive, part of you hesitates to leave because you fear appearing ungrateful. You replay memories of their generosity and question whether you are overlooking their good qualities. This internal conflict keeps many people trapped far longer than they ever imagined possible. Gratitude, which should strengthen healthy relationships, is manipulated into becoming a prison. Healthy love never demands repayment for compassion. It does not remind you of every sacrifice during moments of disagreement, nor does it use generosity to silence your voice. Real kindness seeks your well-being without expecting control in return. It celebrates your freedom rather than exploiting your dependence. When every gift comes attached to invisible strings, every favor creates lifelong obligation, and every act of support is eventually used as evidence against you, what appears to be generosity reveals itself as another carefully designed strategy for control. The greatest deception is not the gift itself, but the belief that it was ever freely given, because genuine love gives without calculating profit, while manipulation disguises control as kindness and expects unquestioning loyalty as the price of every seemingly generous act. One of the most frightening signs that a narcissistic individual has abandoned all pretense is their complete willingness to rewrite reality without the slightest hint of shame. Truth, for most people, serves as a foundation for trust. Even when mistakes are made, honest individuals eventually acknowledge what happened, accept responsibility, and work toward repairing the damage. They understand that accountability strengthens relationships because it demonstrates respect for the other person's experiences and feelings. A narcissistic individual, however, often views truth as something flexible rather than fixed. Facts are not respected because they represent reality. They are manipulated because they either support or threaten the image the narcissist desperately wants to protect. When reality becomes inconvenient, they simply create a different version of it and expect everyone else to accept the new story. In the beginning of the relationship, this behavior may be almost impossible to detect. Their lies are often small, subtle, and wrapped in convincing confidence. They may deny making a simple promise, insist they never said something you clearly remember hearing, or offer explanations that sound believable enough to make you question your own memory. Because these moments seem insignificant, you dismiss them as misunderstandings. Everyone forgets details from time to time, so you naturally assume that this is nothing more than normal human error. What you do not yet realize is that these small distortions are often testing grounds. They are discovering how easily they can influence your perception of reality. As time passes, the distortions become bolder. Events you both experienced together are suddenly described in completely different ways. Conversations you remember vividly are denied with absolute certainty. Promises that gave you hope seem to vanish from history as though they never existed. When you gently remind them of what actually happened, they respond with remarkable confidence. They may look directly into your eyes and insist that your memory is completely wrong. Their certainty is often so convincing that you begin wondering whether you truly remembered the situation correctly. This confidence is one of the reasons the manipulation becomes so powerful. Most honest people hesitate before making absolute claims unless they are certain of the facts. The narcissist rarely displays such hesitation. They speak with unwavering conviction, even when the evidence clearly contradicts them. They understand that confidence often appears more persuasive than truth. By refusing to acknowledge uncertainty, they place enormous psychological pressure on you. You begin assuming that if they sound so certain, perhaps you really have misunderstood what happened. Gradually, you find yourself replaying conversations repeatedly in your mind. You examine every detail, searching for evidence that your memory may have failed you. Instead of trusting your own experiences, you begin relying on their interpretation of events. This shift is incredibly dangerous because it weakens your confidence in your own judgment. And the more you question yourself, the easier it becomes for them to shape your understanding of reality. Little by little, your inner compass becomes dependent upon someone who has no intention of leading you toward the truth. One of the most painful aspects of this manipulation is how frequently blame is redirected. Whenever they behave in hurtful ways, they rarely discuss their actions honestly. Instead, they focus entirely on your reaction. If they insult you and you become upset, the conversation suddenly becomes about your sensitivity rather than their cruelty. If they repeatedly break promises and you express disappointment, they accuse you of expecting too much. If they betray your trust and you confront them, they portray themselves as victims of your unfair accusations. In every situation, the spotlight shifts away from their behavior and lands squarely on your response. This constant reversal leaves you emotionally exhausted. You enter conversations hoping to resolve problems, yet somehow you leave apologizing for bringing the issue up in the first place. You begin every discussion with a clear understanding of what happened, but by the end you feel confused, guilty, and uncertain. The original problem remains unresolved while your confidence steadily erodes. Over time, this pattern teaches you to remain silent because speaking up rarely brings clarity. Instead, it often results in greater confusion. Another disturbing characteristic is their willingness to alter details depending on the audience. When speaking privately with you, they may tell one version of events. When discussing the same situation with friends, family members, or coworkers, the story changes dramatically. Important facts disappear. Their own mistakes are minimized or erased completely. Your reactions are exaggerated until you appear unreasonable. They selectively present information that protects their reputation while quietly damaging yours. Because others hear only part of the story, they often struggle to understand why you feel so deeply hurt. This ability to reshape reality extends beyond individual conversations. They may completely rewrite the history of your relationship. Moments of genuine affection are later described as burdens they carried out of obligation. Sacrifices you made together suddenly become sacrifices only they made. Achievements you accomplished through teamwork are claimed entirely as their own success. Difficult periods that required mutual effort become stories in which they alone carried the relationship while you supposedly contributed nothing. Every memory is adjusted to support the narrative that portrays them as superior and you as inadequate. Perhaps one of the cruelest tactics is convincing you that your emotional reactions prove your instability. After repeatedly distorting reality, they point to your growing confusion as evidence that something is wrong with you. They tell you that you are forgetful, overly emotional, irrational, or incapable of seeing situations clearly. Ironically, the confusion they intentionally create becomes the very evidence they use against you. You begin wondering whether you truly are losing your ability to think clearly, when in reality your mind is responding naturally to relentless psychological manipulation. As this pattern continues, everyday decisions become increasingly difficult. You hesitate before expressing opinions because you expect them to be challenged. You second-guess your memories before speaking because you fear being told they never happened. You apologize even when you have done nothing wrong because conflict has trained you to assume responsibility for problems you did not create. This constant uncertainty affects every area of life. Confidence fades, independence weakens, and the ability to trust your own instincts slowly disappears. The most heartbreaking consequence is not simply believing their lies. It is losing confidence in your own truth. You stop trusting your judgment, your perceptions, your emotions, and even your lived experiences. The voice inside you that once recognized right from wrong grows quieter with every manipulated conversation. Yet reality never actually changes. Facts remain facts regardless of how confidently someone denies them. Memories supported by consistent evidence do not become false because another person refuses to acknowledge them. When someone repeatedly twists conversations, denies obvious events, shifts blame, and confidently replaces truth with fiction, they are revealing far more than dishonesty. They are demonstrating that preserving control matters more to them than honesty, accountability, or the emotional well-being of the people who trust them.